flight, Farrell.
Go ahead.
RSO reports vehicle exploded.
Apple is the appliance of the 80s for all those pesky household chores.
Rolled in blood. What's it say?
We didn't just leave the 80s behind. We buried a decade bursting with neon joy, wild rebellion, and once-in-a-lifetime magic like it was a fad we outgrew. What if the 25 things that made the 1980s awesome weren't just pop culture? They were pieces of ourselves we were never supposed to forget. There was a time when music lived only in sound. Then came 1981, and with it, a glowing screen that changed everything. Music television, better known as MTV. Suddenly, music had a face, a costume, a storyline, and a look that mattered just as much as the lyrics. It was not just about hearing your favorite artist, it was about watching them come alive in color. Madonna spun in lace gloves, Prince shimmered in purple silk, and Michael Jackson moonwalked straight into American living rooms like a ghost dancing across the carpet. For a generation growing up in the 80s, MTV was not just television. It was a mood. It was an identity. It was your coolest friend who introduced you to new bands at midnight. And the power it had? Unmatched. If MTV played your song, you were somebody. If they did not, you might as well be invisible. The channel became the tastemaker, gatekeeper, and trendsetter. Teens obsessed over VJs like they were movie stars. Style, language, and attitude spilled from the screen into everyday life. MTV turned bedrooms into dance floors and band posters into sacred wall shrines. This was the birth of visual culture as we know it, and it all started with a rocket ship and a music video. They were not just actors. They were a reflection in the mirror of every teenager who ever felt lost, loud, or completely misunderstood. The Brat Pack did not invent high school drama, but they made it feel real, electric, and terrifyingly close to home. When you watched Molly Ringwald cry in detention, it was not just acting. It was every hallway humiliation, every awkward crush, and every secret you thought nobody else could possibly understand. John Hughes gave them the scripts, but it was the actors. Emilio Estevez, Judd Nelson, Ali Sheedy, Anthony Michael Hall, who gave the 80s its voice. These films did not just entertain, they defined. The Breakfast Club was not a movie, it was a therapy session. 16 Candles felt like a personal diary read aloud. Pretty in Pink asked whether love could survive cliques in class. They gave heart to rebellion, soul to sarcasm, and face to the faceless. The Brat Pack were not perfect, but they were ours. Messy, funny, fragile, and unforgettable. Their films dared to be earnest in a time of cynicism and cool, and decades later, they still feel like a warm letter from your teenage self, sealed in a VHS case, waiting to be remembered. No one was ready, not the music industry, not the public. Not even the moon, which he would soon walk across. In 1982, Michael Jackson released Thriller, a title that would come to define the very heartbeat of pop culture. This was not just an album, it was a tidal wave. Every track felt like it could carry its own legacy, but it was the music video, the short film really, that sent shockwaves through every living room in America. Red leather jackets, ghoulish dance moves, Vincent Price's eerie monologue echoing into a generation's dreams. It was scary. It was sexy. It was genius. Thriller redefined what a pop star could be. Michael was no longer just a singer. He was a world builder, a visual storyteller, a phenomenon. He shattered racial barriers on MTV, igniting a cultural shift that went beyond music. Parents, kids, teens, grandmothers, everyone danced, everyone watched. Thriller became a global obsession, and suddenly, Halloween had a new anthem: the glove, the lean, the laugh. It was not just entertainment, it was an event. To be alive in the 80s was to live in the shadow of Thriller. And to this day, nothing has ever moved quite like it. Saturday mornings were sacred. You rolled out of bed in your pajamas, poured a sugary mountain of cereal, and turned on the television like it was a portal to another world. And what greeted you? Magic. Pure animated magic. Shows like He-Man, Transformers, DuckTales, and the Smurfs made those few hours feel like a festival of joy. These were not just cartoons, they were lifelines. The stories were bold, the heroes fearless, and the villains just scary enough to make victory feel earned. You learned about justice from turtles in bandanas, loyalty from robotic cars, and friendship from ponies with glittering eyes. Commercial breaks were an art form. The toys matched the shows, and the shows matched your dreams. This was marketing fused with myth-making, and we loved every second. Your parents saw it as noise, but you knew better. It was a weekly escape from school, chores, and whatever sadness the week might have brought. Those mornings felt endless, like time itself was bending in your favor. The television glowed with color and hope. And as the final credits rolled and the sun climbed higher, you held on to those last cartoon moments like a secret handshake only kids understood. Going to the movies in the 1980s was not just an outing, it was an initiation. You did not just watch Back to the Future, you traveled in time. You did not just see E.T., you believed in aliens, friendship, and flying bikes. The Goonies made treasure hunts seem plausible in your own backyard. Ghostbusters had you checking every closet for slime. These were not just movies, they were portals, promises, and rites of passage. Every frame was burned into memory, every line quoted in playgrounds and lunchrooms. Blockbusters were not about selling tickets, they were about shaping imaginations. They gave us John Williams scores that made hearts race and Spielberg visions that made magic feel real. Crowds lined up outside theaters, popcorn in hand, hearts pounding. Parents, kids, teens, they all came together in the darkness of a movie theater to be transformed. These films were louder, brighter, funnier, and somehow deeper than anything that came before. And when the credits rolled, you did not leave the theater the same person who walked in. You left dreaming, you left changed. The movies of the 1980s did not just entertain a generation, they raised one. It started with 6 colors, just 6. But somehow, it unlocked a puzzle that would challenge millions of minds and define an era. The Rubik's Cube was not just a toy. It was an obsession, a flex, a frustration, and a badge of honor, all crammed into a twisting, clicking square. You either solved it or you peeled the stickers off. There was no in-between. Classrooms, kitchens, and family living rooms were all temporary battlegrounds for who could line up the colors first. It looked simple, but it demanded patience, logic, and a kind of determination that made it feel like a test of character. And oh, the speed solvers, like magicians, like gods. The cube became a status symbol among kids and a stress toy for adults. It was everywhere. Commercials, competitions, cereal box giveaways. You were not cool if you had not at least tried to conquer it. For a moment, the Rubik's Cube was the brainy heart of the decade, a symbol of what it meant to be smart and stylish. It taught an entire generation to keep twisting, keep trying, and keep believing that order could come from chaos. Before Nintendo, video games were gasping for breath. After Nintendo, they were alive again. It was 1985 when the Nintendo Entertainment System hit American shelves and changed living rooms forever. The gray and red console was a Trojan horse, simple in design but hiding worlds inside. Suddenly, you were not just a kid. You were Mario, leaping through pipes to save the princess. You were Link, braving dungeons for the Triforce. You were part of something massive. Nintendo did not just bring games. It brought heroes. It brought soundtracks you could hum in your sleep and cheat codes whispered like secret spells. The controller became an extension of your hand. Blowing into cartridges felt like a ritual, and beating a level felt like beating life itself. For many, Nintendo was not a toy. It was a friend, a daily escape, a safe place to fail and try again. Families gathered around the screen, arguing over whose turn it was. Siblings became rivals. Parents got curious. And the living room was never the same again. With every beep and pixel, Nintendo gave us wonder, and it never asked for anything more than time and imagination. If the 1980s had a soundtrack, it blared from a boombox. Big, bulky, and proud, the boombox was more than just a stereo. It was a statement. You carried it on your shoulder not because it was easy, but because it was loud. It was rebellion with a battery pack. Hip-hop rose from sidewalks and city blocks, and the boombox was its pulpit. Breakdancers made cardboard stages. Crowds formed like rituals. The music roared, and the city danced. These machines brought bass into backyards, rhythm into corners, and unity into chaos. Whether it was Grandmaster Flash or Run DMC, whether it was Michael Jackson or Madonna, the boombox did not care. It amplified whoever held the power cord. You controlled the vibe. And that mattered. It mattered so much. Because in an era without streaming, without smartphones, without wireless speakers, the boombox gave you freedom. The louder you played, the louder you were. It was not just about music, it was about identity, expression, and claiming your own tiny stage wherever you stood. They were not just dolls, they were your children, adopted, named, cared for like living, breathing extensions of your heart. Cabbage Patch Kids exploded into American homes like nothing else before them. Chubby cheeks, yarn hair, signed bottoms, they were adorable and slightly strange. But they were yours. No two were the same. That was the magic. It felt personal, like fate. Parents fought in department stores to get them. Shelves emptied in seconds. News clips showed grown adults wrestling over plush plastic babies. It was not just a toy. It was a phenomenon. And it swept through the country like a fever dream. Kids brought them everywhere, to school, to bed, to dinner. They came with birth certificates and backstories, turning playtime into family drama. In an age of make-believe, these dolls made things feel real. The craze might sound ridiculous today, but in the moment, it was everything. A doll you had to adopt? That was not just marketing, it was genius. It made you feel responsible, important, part of something. And when the madness faded, what was left was a memory of wide-eyed joy, pure affection, and a little friend who made childhood feel alive. The future did not arrive with a bang. It arrived in a beige plastic box that hummed quietly on a desk in the corner of your house. The Commodore 64, the Apple Macintosh. These were not just machines, they were portals into something entirely new. You typed, and the screen listened. You clicked, and doors opened. At first, it was simple. Word processors, floppy disks, a little green cursor blinking like it had a secret. But quickly, it became more. Games, learning, possibility. For kids, it was a playground. For parents, a tool. For dreamers, a revolution. It changed homework. It changed jobs. It changed you. That blinking cursor? It whispered that anything was possible. Families gathered around, just trying to figure it out together. The sound of a printer was like the future on paper. And the internet? Still a myth. Still a whisper. But you felt it coming. With every boot-up chime, every pixelated game, every painstaking keystroke, you were stepping into a new world. Personal computers did not just change technology. They changed lives. And for the first time ever, the future was not in a sci-fi movie. It was sitting on your desk. Madonna was not just a pop star. She was a cultural earthquake in stilettos. With every music video, every outfit, every defiant stare into the camera, she redefined what it meant to be a woman on stage. Like a Virgin was not just a song. It was a dare, a challenge to tradition, a celebration of contradiction. She was innocence and provocation, lace gloves and rosaries, punk attitude and disco flair. No one looked like her. No one acted like her. And that was the point. In a world trying to box in femininity, Madonna kicked the walls down in heels. She made fashion dangerous again. Layered bracelets, teased hair, oversized crucifixes. Suddenly, teen girls everywhere were dressing like her, talking like her, being her. Her fashion was not an accessory to her music. It was the message: be bold, be loud, be unapologetically you. She did not just influence trends, she created blueprints. And behind the sequins and fishnets was something deeper. The idea that pop could be powerful, that glam could be gritty, and that no one had to ask permission to be seen. Madonna turned rebellion into runway. She gave attitude a soundtrack. And for anyone growing up in the 80s, she was proof that being different could make you unforgettable. Hip-hop was born in the Bronx, but in the 80s, it exploded into every corner of American life. It was not just a sound, it was a movement. And when Run DMC hit the stage in Adidas tracksuits and shell-toe sneakers, you knew the world was about to change. This was more than music. It was poetry over beats, rhythm over silence, truth over noise. The 80s marked hip-hop's rise from underground parties to global power. LL Cool J, Public Enemy, Grandmaster Flash. These were not just rappers. They were messengers. Each lyric felt like a coded message from the streets, a heartbeat from the city itself. Hip-hop spoke about struggle, pride, injustice, and survival in a way that made you stop, listen, and feel. And the style? Just as fierce. Gold chains, Kangol hats, boomboxes on shoulders. This was fashion with purpose. The look was bold, but the voice behind it was louder. Breakdancing hit sidewalks like fire. Graffiti tagged the city with identity. And everywhere you turned, the bass dropped like a gavel. Hip-hop turned sneakers into icons and turned raw truth into chart toppers. It did not ask for a seat at the table. It built its own table, right there on the pavement. And anyone who came of age in the 80s knew they were witnessing the rise of a new American language, one that still speaks volumes. If the 80s had a personality, it was neon, loud, proud, and impossible to ignore. Color was not just a trend, it was a statement, and no one whispered. Leg warmers in hot pink, tracksuits in electric blue, eyeshadow that could stop traffic. The entire decade looked like it had been dipped in a highlighter and blasted with a disco ball. It was not about subtlety, it was about standing out. Walk into any mall, any gym, any music video, and it was a rainbow riot. But this was not chaos. It was confidence. Kids wore neon shoelaces. Adults rocked neon windbreakers. Even toys and commercials buzzed with that wild fluorescent glow. It was the decade where fashion turned into rebellion through brightness, because after the muted earth tones of the 70s, the 80s decided to scream. And we listened. We wore color like armor. We matched green earrings to orange belts without blinking. Fashion became a kind of freedom, to be seen, to be remembered, to be unapologetically alive. And yeah, sometimes it was ridiculous. But it was fun. It was electric. And most of all, it was a sign of the times, a wild, glowing, unforgettable beacon of 80s spirit. Shoulder pads were not just a fashion choice. They were a power move. In the 80s, women were stepping into boardrooms, climbing corporate ladders, and making sure they were seen, and their clothes spoke volumes. Blazers were built like armor, structured to demand respect. It was fashion designed to take up space. For the first time, silhouettes were not about softness. They were about strength. Joan Collins and Linda Evans on Dynasty made it glamorous. Real-life professionals made it revolutionary. Women wanted to be taken seriously in a world that still doubted their presence. And what better way to announce yourself than with broad shoulders and bold suits? These outfits said, "I am here, I am not afraid, and I have earned my place." Skirts got shorter, heels got higher, and ambition got louder. You could hear it in the clack of pumps on polished floors. You could see it in the structured cuts of every outfit on Wall Street. This was more than fashion. It was feminist defiance wrapped in fabric. And underneath all that padding was the undeniable truth. Women were rewriting the rules. One outfit at a time. Power dressing did not just make a statement, it became the voice. There were bands, and then there were hair metal bands. They did not just play music, they exploded onto the stage. Bon Jovi, Mötley Crüe, Poison, these were not just names. They were icons with teased hair, eyeliner, and leather pants so tight they could probably break glass. The 80s were loud, flashy, and unapologetic, and hair metal was the soundtrack. These bands brought arena anthems and pyrotechnics and turned concerts into full-blown rock operas. They made being over the top a lifestyle. Power ballads met guitar solos that could melt your face off. It was glam, grit, and glory all rolled into a headbang, and they owned it. From the moment they strutted on stage, they dripped charisma and chaos. Music videos looked like wild fever dreams, smoke machines, motorcycles, women in fringe, and men who looked like peacocks in heat. And we loved it. Teens blasted them in bedrooms. Posters covered every inch of the wall. Even parents, reluctantly or not, knew the lyrics. These bands made rebellion look like theater, and for a generation that craved identity, they gave us swagger, eyeliner, and the kind of sound you could feel in your bones. Hair metal was not subtle, but neither was the 80s. The shopping mall was more than a place to buy things. It was the beating heart of teenage life. You did not just go to the mall, you lived there. It was where you met your friends, saw your crush, and discovered who you wanted to be. The food court was your kingdom. The arcade was your battleground. And the record store? That was your soul. Malls in the 80s were social cathedrals built from neon lights and polished tiles. You tried on clothes you could not afford. You loitered for hours. You flirted by the Orange Julius. And if you were lucky, your favorite store had a photo booth to capture the chaos. Escalators became runways. Hallways were arenas of style and identity. Whether it was Spencer's, The Gap, or Foot Locker, every store felt like its own little world. You were not just shopping, you were performing. The mall was your stage. Your friends were your co-stars. And the soundtrack? A steady stream of synth pop and laughter echoing off the glass. It was where friendships began and hearts broke, where trends were born and gossip spread faster than wildfire. In the 80s, the mall was not just a building, it was the center of the universe. In the 80s, getting fit was not just about health, it was about style. It was about glory. Aerobics hit America like a high kick to the face, and suddenly, everyone was sweating in sync to pulsing beats and neon spandex. Jane Fonda led the charge. Her workout tapes were gospel. Living rooms became fitness studios. Leotards, sweatbands, leg warmers. This was not just exercise. It was performance. You did not just move, you burned. And you looked good doing it. Celebrities jumped on the trend. Gyms popped up everywhere. And for the first time, people wanted to be active and look fabulous while doing it. This was not a grim treadmill march. It was a dance. A celebration of energy, movement, and control. The 80s made fitness feel like fashion and made health feel fun. Men joined too, in cut-off shirts and short shorts, lifting weights in front of full-length mirrors. Aerobics videos sold by the millions. They were pop culture events, right up there with hit sitcoms and blockbuster movies. Fitness was in. Everyone was chasing that sculpted, sweat-glazed look. It was a movement, a mantra. And underneath the glitter and the bouncing was something real, a desire to take charge of your body, your mood, and your destiny. Diet Coke did not just arrive, it announced itself. It was 1982, and suddenly there it was, sleek, silver, and somehow cooler than everything else in your fridge. This was not just soda. It was soda with an attitude. People were becoming health conscious, and Coca-Cola knew it. They gave the world an alternative, and we grabbed it with both hands. The can itself looked futuristic. The taste was crisp, sharp, slightly rebellious. You could have your cake and drink it too. Diet Coke became the drink of choice for the fashion-forward, the calorie-conscious, and anyone trying to look good in a shoulder-padded suit. It was everywhere, at malls, in offices, on TV sets next to glowing VCRs. Celebrities held it like an accessory. Models posed with it like it was perfume. It was light. It was fizzy. And it meant something. It meant you were modern. It meant you cared about your image. It meant you could still enjoy life without the guilt. It was not just a beverage. It was a movement, a cool, carbonated promise that you could be smarter, sleeker, and savvier than the people drinking the red can. And in the 80s, that mattered. A lot. Going to Pizza Hut in the 80s was not just about food. It was an event. The smell hit you before the door even closed behind you. Red checkered tablecloths, thick menus with pictures, glasses filled with cola and crushed ice, and in the corner, an arcade machine waiting to eat your quarters. It was magic. You sat in those big red booths with your family or your friends, flipping through laminated menus like you were at a fine dining joint. Pan pizza was the crown jewel, crispy, buttery, sizzling with cheese that stretched for miles. It was not about fast food, it was about the experience. You waited for your pie like it was a sacred ritual. The jukebox hummed in the background. Maybe your server wore a paper hat, maybe you got to read a comic book while waiting. Maybe you found a new favorite game. Pizza Hut was a memory factory, a warm, gooey, perfectly greasy escape from whatever was happening outside. And for a kid in the 80s, it was a kingdom. The pizza was hot, the games were bright, and the moments were golden. It was not just dinner, it was a slice of happiness. Long before streaming playlists and auto-suggestions, there was the record store, a sacred space, a sonic temple. You walked in and were greeted by walls lined with square-shaped dreams, vinyl sleeves with wild artwork, names you had heard, names you had not, and all of it waiting to be discovered. There was no algorithm to guide you, only curiosity. You flipped through crates like an archaeologist, hoping to find something that would blow your mind. The guy behind the counter knew everything, and he judged you, just a little, based on what you bought. That was part of the fun. You listened to albums in the store's listening booth, headphones on, heart racing. Maybe you found a bootleg live show. Maybe you found your new favorite band. Either way, you left with a paper bag full of possibility. Record stores were more than retail. They were communities. You met people there, you formed bands, you debated top 10 lists and learned which drummer really mattered. You did not just buy music, you became music. It was personal, tangible, real. And in the 80s, nothing felt cooler than walking home with a record under your arm, headphones in your bag, and your soundtrack for the week. There was a time when television had limits. You watched what was on when it was on, and if you missed it, you missed it. But then came cable, and everything changed. With channels like HBO and CNN, the screen stopped sleeping. Suddenly, news was 24 hours. Movies were uncut. Content was uncensored. It felt dangerous and fresh. CNN became a window to the world, always open, always watching. For the first time, you could follow breaking news as it happened. It felt like the future. HBO, meanwhile, turned your living room into a movie theater. It was wild to see films on your own couch, no commercials, no edits. Just you, a bowl of popcorn, and a level of access that felt like magic. Cable gave you choices, dozens of channels, sports, comedy, drama, documentaries. It was not just television anymore. It was a world within a box, and it turned passive watchers into curious explorers. Kids stayed up late watching reruns they were not supposed to. Adults discovered stand-up comedy that pushed boundaries. It connected us, divided us, obsessed us, and it never turned off. Cable television was not just a new way to watch, it was a new way to live. Just say no. It was more than a slogan. It was a mantra, a moral line drawn in the sand. In the 80s, drugs were not just a problem. They were a threat looming over every school, every neighborhood, every dinner table conversation. Nancy Reagan's campaign marched into classrooms and television sets like a crusade. Posters went up, commercials played on loop, cartoon characters and celebrities told you to stay clean, stay strong, stay pure. It was earnest. It was relentless. It was everywhere. Kids got DARE shirts. Parents got pamphlets. Schools got visits from uniformed officers with serious faces and plastic bags full of crushed examples. And while it often felt simplified, even naive, the message was powerful. You had a choice, and you needed to make the right one. Some kids rolled their eyes, some kids listened, but no one ignored it. The phrase burned itself into the cultural memory. Just say no was printed on binders, echoed in sitcoms, even used in rap lyrics. It became a symbol of the tension between fear and hope, between the reality of addiction and the dream of prevention. It did not solve everything, it could not, but it tried. And in a decade defined by big risks and even bigger consequences, sometimes all you had was the chance to say no and the hope that it would be enough. It was supposed to be a triumph, a shining moment of American progress, a teacher going to space, children watching in awe, dreams being launched with rocket fuel and faith. But on January 28, 1986, the sky betrayed us. The Challenger space shuttle broke apart 73 seconds after liftoff. What followed was not just shock, it was heartbreak. Across the nation, classrooms had tuned in to watch history. Instead, they witnessed tragedy. There were no words, just smoke trails and silence. For many, it was the first time the future felt fragile. Space had always seemed limitless, glamorous, heroic. Now it felt human, and humans break. The loss of 7 brave souls, including Krista McAuliffe, the first civilian chosen to fly, cut deep. The optimism of the 80s paused. We asked questions. We mourned. We learned how grief moves through television wires and into living rooms. The Challenger tragedy was not just an event, it was a scar. And like all scars, it reminded us of both our ambition and our limits. In the years that followed, space exploration would continue, but never with the same wide-eyed innocence. The sky was still beautiful, but we understood now. Beauty does not always mean safety. They wore tailored suits, carried briefcases, and moved like they were in a hurry, even when they were not. Yuppies, young urban professionals, the walking, talking ambition of the 1980s. They lived in glass towers and drove shiny BMWs. They worked hard. They played harder. They spent a lot. And they made success look like a lifestyle brand. It was not just about money. It was about image, the right watch, the right phone, the right address. For the first time, wealth was not just something you had. It was something you showed. Men and women alike embraced the yuppie ethos. They exercised in gyms with wall-to-wall mirrors. They drank Diet Coke, wore Ralph Lauren, and read magazines about themselves. Workaholism became sexy. Greed, not exactly shameful. Gordon Gekko in Wall Street was not a villain. He was an icon. Yuppie culture defined the decade's values. Success over sentiment, progress over pause. It was shiny, it was fast, and it was everywhere. Sure, it bred backlash. Not everyone liked what the mirror reflected, but it was honest in its own way. It said, "I want more." And for better or worse, that hunger helped shape modern America. In every tech startup, every influencer, every status symbol flashing on a screen, you can still hear echoes of the yuppie dream. It fell like a wall and rose like a moment that would echo through time. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 was not just the end of a structure, it was the end of an era. A Cold War, long frozen in fear and silence, began to thaw. Americans watched the grainy news footage, people chipping away at concrete with hammers, crying, laughing, reaching through broken barriers to hug strangers. It was raw, it was real, it was history happening in real time. For a generation raised on the shadow of nuclear threats, red phone lines, and spy thrillers, this was unthinkable. And yet, there it was, a wall coming down, freedom flooding in. It felt impossible, and yet entirely earned. The Cold War had been more than politics. It had been a mood, a fear baked into everyday life. And now, that fear cracked. The Berlin Wall fell, but something bigger stood up in its place. Hope. Hope that unity could defeat division, that humanity could rise above ideology. For Americans, it was a moment of pride, relief, and awe. We were not just spectators, we were part of a global release. A generation that had prepared for bombs now celebrated bridges, and nothing would ever be the same again. Barrel of Monkeys was proof that the simplest ideas can last the longest. Released in 1965, the game came in a bright plastic barrel filled with plastic monkeys that linked together by their arms. That was it. No batteries, no board, no setup time. Just spill the monkeys and try to link as many as you could without dropping the chain. It was harder than it looked. The curved arms never seemed to hook just right, and one wrong move could send your whole line tumbling. But when you did it, when you made it past 10 or 15 monkeys, it felt like a small miracle. Kids would challenge each other to beat their records. dump, and restart over and over, totally absorbed. The monkeys themselves were colorful, cheerful, and perfectly palm-sized. The game traveled well. It lived in car glove boxes, grandma's house drawers, and birthday party goodie bags. Decades later, the design remains almost unchanged, which says something about how right they got it the first time. Before screens took over fidget time, there was just you, a barrel, and 24 tiny monkeys daring you to beat your best. The ground round was chaos, comfort, and childhood all wrapped into one. It was the kind of place where parents could get a beer and a burger while their kids threw peanut shells on the ground like it was encouraged. Because it was. The floors were covered in crunchy peanut bits. The air was filled with laughter and the faint smell of popcorn. There were projectors running old cartoons on the wall and kids with balloons trailing behind them like little parade floats. It was loud, it was joyful, and best of all, it felt like no one was trying to rush you out. The ground round leaned into its identity, part sports bar, part family funhouse. There was even a time when the cost of your meal was based on your weight. No, seriously, it was all part of the strange charm that kept people coming back. But as dining trends shifted and the novelty faded, so did the chain. Still, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the crunch of a peanut shell underfoot. But if you were more into burgers and football than cartoons and chaos, our next place might have been your regular haunt. Slap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity, almost overnight. They were simple. A metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. Slide projectors were the original family theater. Before smartphones and digital albums, the only way to share vacation photos was by dimming the lights, pulling down a screen or a blank wall, and clicking through a carousel of 35mm slides. You could hear the quiet hum of the machine, the mechanical clunk as each new photo dropped into place, and the occasional groan from someone who had already seen them twice. But there was magic in it. These evenings were about more than just pictures. They were about storytelling. The beach trip where Dad sunburned his feet. The blurry shot of Grandma mid-sneeze. The perfectly framed sunset over the Grand Canyon. Families would laugh, tease, and remember together, sometimes with popcorn, always with commentary. The projector cast not just images, but atmosphere, the darkened room, the warmth of shared memory, and the feeling that what you were seeing mattered because everyone else was seeing it too. Slide projectors may be obsolete now, but for those who grew up in the 1960s, they were a rite of passage, a way to relive moments in slow, glowing frames, one dusty click at a time. Gino's Hamburgers was one of those places that felt like it had everything. A solid burger, crispy fried chicken, a shake thick enough to challenge your straw. But the best part? It was co-founded by an actual National Football League Hall of Famer, Gino Marchetti of the Baltimore Colts. That kind of crossover was rare back then, and people loved it. The logo even had a little football player flipping a spatula like he had just sacked your hunger. Gino's was particularly big on the East Coast. You would see the glowing red signs as you drove past shopping centers and think, yeah, we are stopping there. It had this casual charm. Nothing too flashy, but dependable in a way that stuck with you. They even teamed up with Kentucky Fried Chicken for a while. You could get your burger and your bucket in one place. That is efficiency, 1980s style. Eventually, though, bigger names moved in, and Gino's fizzled out, with only a couple of locations hanging on in Pennsylvania and Maryland today. But ask anyone who grew up nearby and they will tell you, it was the real deal. And if Gino's was about hearty plates and gridiron glory, then our next stop was about indulgence. Lots of it. Shrimp by the pound, steak on demand, and wine that flowed freely. Giant scrunchies were not just hair ties, they were statements. Big, bold, and often made of velvet or shiny satin, they wrapped around ponytails like fabric donuts. One was never enough. Some girls stacked them. Others coordinated them with earrings, shirts, or shoelaces. You might even wear one on your wrist, just in case your hair needed managing at a moment's notice. They came in every color of the rainbow and every pattern imaginable. Leopard print? Check. Neon green? Of course. Polka dots the size of your thumb? Why not? Scrunchies were soft, gentle on your hair, and perfect for the sky-high ponytails the 1980s demanded. Some had sequins, some had bows. All of them made your hair look like it was ready to host a party. You could spot a scrunchie from across the school cafeteria. It bounced when you walked and made even the messiest bun look intentional. Looking back, they seem oversized and silly, but that was the point. Scrunchies were playful, practical, and loud in the best possible way. And even though they disappeared for a while, anyone who wore one back then knows, you never really outgrow the joy of tossing your hair into a cloud of fabric. Mini skirts arrived like a fashion revolution. Short, sharp, and bold, they sliced through the conservative silhouettes of the 1950s and became the defining garment of the 1960s youth movement. Popularized by designers like Mary Quant and embraced by British mod culture, the miniskirt represented freedom, rebellion, and a new kind of confidence. It was daring but playful, feminine but fierce. Hemlines rose, attitudes shifted, and suddenly women were claiming space on the streets, on the dance floor, and in the workplace. The skirt barely reached mid-thigh, often paired with bold patterns, bright colors, or textured fabrics like corduroy and vinyl. Worn with turtlenecks or boxy jackets, it was as much about contrast as it was about comfort. Women weren't just dressing up, they were dressing out, outward, loudly, visibly. Some schools banned them. Some parents frowned, but the miniskirt kept rising in popularity and in cut. It became a uniform of sorts for women carving out new identities in a changing world. They were photographed on street corners, in protest marches, at record stores, and in the pages of glossy magazines. Photos from the time show crowds of young people in knee socks and miniskirts, smiling wide, striding forward. It was not just fashion. It was a statement, and for those who lived it, it is still stitched into the fabric of memory, one daring hem at a time. Sambo's restaurant was once everywhere. At its peak, over 1,000 locations dotted the American map, and for a time, it was the breakfast joint. You walked in, saw the tiger stripe motif, and knew pancakes were on the way. The food was solid: fluffy pancakes, greasy bacon, big mugs of diner coffee. The kind of breakfast that left you needing a nap by 10 in the morning. But Sambo's legacy is tangled. Its name and branding, drawn from a children's book with racist origins, sparked increasing backlash as public awareness and cultural conversations shifted. People started asking hard questions about what a restaurant should represent. The food stayed consistent, but the reputation cracked. One by one, locations closed or rebranded. And while the last original Sambo's held on until 2020, even it finally changed names. Still, to many who grew up in its booths, it was not about the name. It was about pancake mornings with family and kids' meals with tiger-striped coloring books. But from syrupy stacks to something a little more British, the next forgotten favorite took a trip across the Atlantic and served up deep-fried nostalgia with a dash of malt vinegar. Shoulder pads were not just a trend, they were a transformation. You could put on a blazer and suddenly feel like a corporate warrior, even if you were just headed to homeroom. The goal was to look powerful, confident, and vaguely like a football player on a job interview. From business suits to casual blouses, shoulder pads invaded every piece of clothing in the 1980s. You could not escape them. They were sewn in, velcroed on, or added as an afterthought to make your silhouette scream important. The bigger the pad, the better. Entire generations walked around with squared-off shoulders and structured poise, looking ready to charge into a boardroom or a runway. Some tried to remove them only to realize the entire shirt deflated without the padding. They were ridiculous, and we knew it, but they worked. You stood a little taller, felt a little braver, and if someone bumped into you in the hallway, your outfit absorbed the blow. Looking back now, they seem comically oversized, but at the time, they were armor, fashion armor. And for anyone who wore them, they were a reminder that style was not just about looking good, it was about looking like you meant business. Tangy Taffy was the candy you had to work for, and that was half the fun. Long before it became part of the Laffy Taffy brand, this chewy strip came in a thin plastic wrapper and offered a sweet, stretchy challenge for any sugar-loving kid in the 1960s. It came in vibrant colors and punchy flavors like grape, strawberry, and sour apple, each one delivering a jolt of sugar and just the right amount of tartness. You could bend it, stretch it, or roll it into a ball before finally taking a bite. The longer you chewed, the stronger the flavor got, which made it perfect for kids trying to make a nickel's worth of candy last the whole afternoon. Sometimes it stuck to your teeth. Sometimes it stuck to the wrapper. But it was always worth it. Tangy Taffy was less about elegance and more about fun, bright, bold, and unapologetically sweet. For many kids, it was the ultimate playground treat, swapped on school buses or bought from corner stores with pocket change. Today's candies may be smoother or flashier, but they cannot match the simple satisfaction of a taffy you could stretch, fold, and chew until your jaw hurt. Po Folks was Southern hospitality wrapped in gingham and served with a ladle. You walked in and felt like you had stepped onto a front porch somewhere in Alabama. The tea came in mason jars. The walls were covered in antiques and hand-painted signs with sayings like, "Y'all come back now." And the food? It stuck to your ribs. Fried chicken, black-eyed peas, greens, meatloaf, and catfish, served with a side of cornbread and a whole lot of love. Po Folks made you feel like family, even if you were just passing through. There was a certain pride in the way it presented its southern roots, unapologetically kitschy and warm. The prices were low, the portions were generous, and the vibe was always laid back. You were not there to rush. You were there to eat slow, talk loud, and maybe top it all off with some banana pudding. At its peak, Po Folks had locations across the South and Midwest, but as dining tastes shifted and the novelty faded, many closed down or rebranded. Still, that logo, an old-timey fella tipping his hat, lingers in the minds of diners who remember the hush puppies and home fries. But if you preferred your meals wrapped in foil and served with a little spice, then our next stop had just the chilito for you. Stirrup pants were the 1980s attempt to combine fashion with function, and they did neither particularly well. These leggings had a strap that looped under your foot, supposedly to keep them from riding up. In reality, they pulled awkwardly at your ankles, made your feet sweat, and caused socks to bunch in weird places. But we wore them anyway. They came in bright colors, bold patterns, and every synthetic material known to mankind. They were stretchy, shiny, and often paired with oversized sweaters or blazers that made no logical sense. From the knees up, you looked like a school principal. From the knees down, you looked like a gymnast caught mid-warm-up. But stirrup pants had their moment. They were the go-to outfit for school picture day, mall trips, or just feeling like you belonged in a fashion catalog. The loop under the foot made you feel oddly secure, like your pants were holding onto you. Sure, they sagged in weird places. Sure, they made your calves look like sausages. But they were a staple, loved, mocked, and deeply missed. For anyone who wore them, stirrup pants were more than a fashion choice. They were a commitment, a stretch of spandex, and a rite of passage. TV dinners turned the living room into a dining room, one foil tray at a time. They were not new in the 1960s, but this was the decade they really took off, just as television became the centerpiece of American family life. You got a little compartment for meatloaf, one for mashed potatoes, another for corn, maybe a brownie tucked into the corner. All you had to do was pop it in the oven, wait, and serve. No planning, no cleanup, no arguing over what to cook. The tray itself felt futuristic. Everything had its place. The food was not gourmet, but it was warm, salty, and comforting in its predictability. Families could eat while watching their favorite shows. Kids could feel like grown-ups with their own personal meal. The appeal was clear, fast, easy, and made to match the rhythm of modern life. TV dinners were more than just food. They were a new way to eat, one that said it was okay to sit on the couch and focus on The Ed Sullivan Show or Bonanza. The clang of a fork against aluminum still echoes in memory. For many, it was the sound of dinner and television becoming one. Pup and Taco was one of those places that never made it all the way across the country. But for Californians, it was a staple. You knew what to expect: a wide menu, dirt cheap prices, and a name that sounded like it was made up by a kid. Hot dogs, tacos, burgers, fries, slushies, they threw it all at the wall, and somehow it worked. You could walk up, grab a chili dog and a taco, and be out in 5 minutes for under $3. The locations were easy to spot too. Those retro signs with the big red and yellow block letters were a beacon to beach bums and budget-conscious teens alike. There was nothing gourmet about it, but that was never the point. It was fast, it was greasy, and it was loved. So much so, in fact, that Taco Bell bought most of the locations in the 1980s, essentially absorbing Pup and Taco into its own empire. The quirky name might be gone, but the spirit lives on every time someone adds a side of nachos to their burrito order. And while Pup and Taco ruled the roadside, our next stop was the king of the mall food court. Soft, warm, twisted, and salted. The pretzel that walked so others could run. Acid wash jeans were loud before you even opened your mouth. With their blotchy patterns and faded splotches, they looked like someone had taken a bleach bottle to denim, and somehow that became cool. These jeans were rebellious, messy, and unmistakably 1980s. Everyone had a pair. Some wore them tight-rolled at the ankle, others let them drape over high-top sneakers. Acid wash showed up in jackets, skirts, and full matching sets that turned entire outfits into walking eye strain. You could not blend in wearing acid wash. You stood out, and that was the point. It was denim with attitude. Rough, bold, a little chaotic. Parents hated it. Teachers rolled their eyes. But teens embraced the weirdness. It felt edgy, like you were wearing the uniform of a generation that refused to dress quietly. Old photographs now show groups of kids lined up in front of lockers, each one looking like they had just emerged from a bleach accident and loving it. Acid wash was not timeless, it was not flattering, but it was unforgettable. And in a decade known for excess, it fit right in. Even now, pulling on an old pair brings back the noise, the neon, and the thrill of breaking the fashion rules. Rotary phones were more than a way to talk. They were a ritual. Heavy, anchored to a table or wall and connected by a coiled cord, these phones had a satisfying weight and a rhythm all their own. Each number you dialed had to be carefully selected with a finger, spun around the circular dial, and released with a soft whir. If you dialed the wrong digit near the end, start over. It took patience, and that was part of the charm. You memorized numbers, you waited your turn. And when the phone rang, it was a real ring, loud, metallic, and impossible to ignore. Talking on the rotary phone meant stretching the cord down the hallway for privacy, wrapping it around your fingers during a long conversation, and sometimes having to politely ask someone to hang up because it was your turn to use it. There were no voicemails, no caller ID, just trust, timing, and the occasional busy signal. Today, a rotary phone feels like a relic, but for many growing up in the 1960s, it was a constant companion. From late-night talks to awkward first calls, its clicks and clatters are etched in memory like the voices it once carried. Over-the-top hairdos in the 1980s were less about style and more about spectacle. To get that perfect towering poof or side-swept shell, You needed a can of hairspray in one hand and a teasing comb in the other. Some mornings, the bathroom turned into a construction site. Hair was sprayed, scrunched, fluffed, and frozen into place like a sculpture that dared not move. Mousse was slathered on like sunscreen, followed by heat from a curling iron so hot it could leave permanent dents in your bangs. It was a daily battle between gravity and vanity usually won. The bigger the hair, the closer to cool. Class photos from the decade show clouds of bangs, mile-high ponytails, and helmets of blonde that could survive a wind tunnel. Everyone walked around smelling faintly of aerosol. Some kids were practically flammable, but at the time, it was worth it. You judged your popularity by the size of your bangs. A flat head was social suicide. Looking back now, it seems absurd, but for those who lived it, there was no higher compliment than being told your hair looked totally rad. Farrell's Ice Cream Parlor was not a restaurant. It was an event. Walk into any Farrell's and you were met with a symphony of chaos. Waiters in candy-striped vests, marching drums, birthday horns, and people singing like it was opening night on Broadway. The floor shook with excitement. Kids screamed with joy. And at the center of it all was ice cream. Mountains of it. The Pig's Trough Sundae was the crown jewel, a massive dessert piled high with scoops of every flavor and toppings galore. And if you finished it solo? They rang a bell and brought the whole place to a standstill. It was part show, part sugar rush, and 100% unforgettable. Parents endured it for their kids. Kids loved it like it was Disneyland. But as the years went by, the charm faded. Maybe it was the noise. Maybe it was the cost. Or maybe people just stopped wanting their birthday to sound like a fire drill. Farrell's slowly melted away, leaving behind only echoes of whipped cream and clanging bells. And now that we have shouted ourselves hoarse with birthday songs, let us take it down a notch, because our next stop is as cozy as a cup of diner coffee on a rainy Pacific Northwest morning. Bugles arrived in 1966, and with them came a whole new shape of snacking. Shaped like tiny trumpets or cones, they were the snack you could eat or wear. Kids popped them onto their fingertips, wiggled their hands like claws, and then crunched them down one by one. But the novelty was not just in the shape. Bugles had a distinct texture, light, crispy, and a little flaky, that made them feel different from chips or pretzels. The corn-based flavor was salty, a little buttery, and oddly addictive. Unlike many snacks of the era, Bugles were not trying to copy something else. They were their own thing. Whether poured into a bowl for a party or packed into a lunchbox for recess, they brought a certain crunchy cheer to any setting. Parents liked that they were baked, not fried. Kids just liked that they were fun. Bugles became a staple of 1960s snack shelves, alongside pretzel rods and Fritos, but they stood out for their playfulness. Even now, decades later, slipping a Bugle onto your finger sparks a flash of childhood. They were silly, satisfying, and one of the few snacks that doubled as a costume. Pioneer chicken was not just food, it was a vibe. An LA staple with an orange and red glow that felt like it came from another world. The fried chicken here was unlike anything else. Its signature reddish-brown coating almost looked radioactive, but once you bit into that ultra-crispy skin, you got it. Tender chicken inside, wild crunch on the outside, and just enough seasoning to make you reach for a napkin between bites. People loved Pioneer because it was loud, bold, and unapologetically messy. And if you were anywhere near Los Angeles during the 1980s, you could not miss it. With Dodgers memorabilia on the walls and that blazing neon signage out front, it was practically a sports bar disguised as a fast food joint. It was the kind of place you hit up after a game, or on a late-night fried chicken run with your cousins. Eventually, though, the fried chicken wars heated up, and Pioneer could not keep up. Locations closed, memories faded, and only a few die-hard fans kept the dream alive. But once you have tasted that crunch, it stays with you. Speaking of flavor bombs, let us head to a place that steamed their hot dogs and beer and served tiki cocktails next to vinyl booths, an odd pairing that somehow made perfect sense. Mall food court hangouts were not about the food, They were about freedom. Teenagers in the 1980s treated the mall like their second home, wandering its air-conditioned halls with nothing but pocket change and big plans to do absolutely nothing. The food court was the epicenter. Tables filled with cliques, couples, and groups of giggling friends stretched out time between slices of greasy pizza and soft pretzels. One soda could last hours, especially when refills were free. You scoped out crushes, eavesdropped on drama, and occasionally made eye contact with someone cool enough to nod back. Parents dropped you off and picked you up hours later, trusting the mall to act like a babysitter with bright lights and security guards. Whether you sat near the arcade or tucked into the corner by Orange Julius, the food court was a social stage. It was loud, it was messy, and it felt like your world. Every weekend brought the same faces, the same greasy trays, and the same comforting rhythm of adolescent independence. No one talked about it like it was special, but for those who grew up there, it was the perfect mix of noise, neon, and growing up in public. If these memories hit you like a mixtape from the past, drop your favorite 80s moment in the comments. Give us a righteous thumbs up and hit subscribe so you never miss a rewind.